Hi folks, Pete Lane here. Welcome to Blind Abilities. Let's go out west again to the Enchanted Hills Camp in Napa Valley, California, sponsored by the San Francisco Lighthouse for the Blind. There, way up on Veeder Mountain, is where Jeff Thompson connected with his old friend George Wurtzel to teach a group of blind students the art of woodworking. Jeff also connected with another one of his woodworking students, Trevor Astrope. Let's meet Trevor and hear about his blindness, his childhood, and his passion for computers.
At 6 years old, I had optic neuritis, left me with about 10% of vision in one eye and about 2% in one eye. Then when I was 12, in my good eye, I had the detached retina. My vision went from shadows to light perception to nothing just over time. I had a teacher's aide for grade 9, 10, and 11, and then grade 12, they wanted me to be more independent, so they let her go. While I was in school, I was always into computers. When I went to university, I got a Unix account and taught myself how to use Unix. Unix is an operating system, similar but very different to, say, Windows. Most internet servers are running some form of Unix.
And let's hear about Trevor's other passion, his passion for making guitars.
For me, I wanted to basically have my own custom-made guitar. I didn't want a Gibson or Fender logo on it. I wanted my own logo, and then I wanted it designed to my specifications. I realized, well, why don't I just try to do this myself? Because the only way it's going to be the way I exactly want it is if I do it. And that's kind of always been my philosophy in life. Like, if you want something done right, just do it yourself, right? I didn't think blind people could use industrial machinery or even hand tools. I like my fingers. I don't want to lose them. I'm going to do this all with hand tools. One tool that is really helpful in guitar making is a handheld router. So I learned it here, and that gave me the confidence to say, hey, yeah, this is easy. I can do this. And it's much more precise and saves a lot of time.
Let's hear Trevor's advice for other members of the blindness community.
It's always hard starting because people will try to place barriers on you that you may not necessarily have. It's really important to be able to prove yourself one way or another, that even if it's a short-term position or maybe even volunteering, anything that you can sort of prove to people that, hey, I can do this.
And now, without further ado, let's join Jeff Thompson and his guest, Trevor Astrope.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson, and we're up on top of Veeder Mountain at Enchanted Hills Camp, and we're attending the Woodworkers for the Blind annual event. I believe this is the 7th annual event, and this is part of San Francisco Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I'm sitting outside on the deck of the workshop, and we're visiting with Trevor Astrope, and he's from Montreal. How are you doing, Trevor?
I'm doing great.
Great. Trevor, can you tell what your job duties are, what you do for a living?
So I work in IT. I work at Morgan Stanley, and I work as the global lead for the Level 3 operations team for their private cloud.
And you have an interest in woodworking, mostly centered around guitar building.
Right, so I'm an aspiring guitar builder. I work in my home, primarily in my kitchen/workshop. And I'm building guitars primarily by hand with some power tools. So yeah, I come to these workshops to learn new skills that I can take back home with me and apply to my guitar building.
That's great. And how did you find about the WW4B event out here at Enchanted Hills?
I found out first by finding WW4B and then subscribing to that mailing list and joining the groups to get access to the website and the articles. And then from there, I found out, hey, there's this summer workshop. And even before WW4B, I was searching on the internet to find out if there was any kind of blind woodworking workshops. Because I did see some YouTube videos where there were people showing videos about teaching blind people woodworking. And George Wurtzel was one of these people. And I'm like, well, how do I get there? How do I find that? And, I searched the internet. I didn't really find anything how to get to these places, but then I found W4B, and then from there, that's where the workshop is organized through and advertised through, and I said, that's where I want to be.
And you can find that at WW4B, and it's the number 4, WW4B, the number 4B.org on the web, and you can look on there, and if you're interested in woodworking or finding out more about it, that's where you would go. Trevor, you're blind, vision impaired.
Right, totally blind.
When did this all take place?
Well, when I was 6 years old, I had optic neuritis. Left me with about 10% of vision in one eye and maybe about 2% in one eye, which was just peripheral vision. And then when I was 12, I had in my good eye, I had the detached retina, which was misdiagnosed and didn't go treated in time. And then my vision went from shadows to light perception to nothing just over time.
So how was your educational journey with accessibility, alternative techniques? Were you mainstreamed? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I grew up in a northern community in Canada. I read large print, was a low vision user all through school because I lost my sight when I was in the first grade, and managed pretty well. I had the CCTV enlarger and large print typewriter and that kind of thing because my handwriting was very messy. I was always told teachers couldn't read it. So they always wanted me to type. So I learned to type at a young age. When I was 12 and I lost my sight, I left this town and I moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I lived with my grandmother to go to school in the city because there was much more resources there, and I can braille my work and then they would translate it. And then I started using computers at that point. This is in the 1980s, around 1985, 84, 85, and I started using VersaBraille, an Apple IIe computer. Then I started doing most of my work with those technologies, and when I eventually went to university, I took the same type of thing, except I had a PC by that point and the newer VersaBraille. And then at some point I got, what was the other thing that was called? Braille and Speak. I had a Braille and Speak for a while too.
So you went through mainstream school through your educational process?
Right. And it was all sort of facilitated through the Manitoba Department of Education. They had a special branch that they had consultants that liaison between the school, and Manitoba Education produced all their own materials. They had their own recording studio and did recorded books, so any books on the curriculum they produced. And like I said, I could braille my work. It would ship there, and then they had people that would translate it and write it all out in between the braille lines. It would print out what it was, and they'd send it back. And there was like maybe 2 or 3 day turnaround for that.
Oh, that's awesome. So did you have a teacher for the visually impaired?
I had a teacher's aide once I got to high school that did a lot of that work that went back and forth. She learned how to read Braille, and then she would translate my stuff. She would do tactile drawings. She would do a lot of reading of materials that weren't available, or articles or different materials that we had that was sort of ad hoc. She would do that, and she worked part-time. So yeah, she worked with me during high school. Grade 9, 10, and 11, and then grade 12, they wanted me to be more independent, so they let her go, and they wanted me to fend for myself because they knew I was going to university and I wouldn't have those kind of resources around.
You had to start advocating and doing it yourself.
They wanted me to learn to be more independent. So grade 12, I went solo.
When you were at university, did you have a students' disabilities office of sorts?
Yes, there was. Well, they had a computer center which had, PCs with, which was a voice program back then that we used. Was it called Flipper? Something like that.
Oh, wow.
The early 90s, I guess. Like I said, I used the VersaBraille for a long time, and then I got a PC. They had a computer room which had the Braille printer, and they had a bunch of stuff in there. I went to write my exams there, so the teacher would give the exams. They would put them usually on a computer, and then I would read them on the computer and answer them on the computer.
So I have a feeling in the years that you were doing this, was it very acceptable, or was it standard that people would be going to the computer science fields like you were?
No, it wasn't. When I first started university, there was a computer programming for the blind course, and it was on mainframes. And my first year was the last year of this program because mainframes were being supplanted by PCs, right? And Unix type of systems. So they were a dying system. And so I think what they were finding is that the graduates of these programs were having a difficult time getting employment. I was interested. I used computers all through high school, and I did have an aptitude for it, but it was just not something that was open for me because the university that I went to, this is sort of when, the Mac and the PC were challenging for supremacy, and they put their money on the Mac. So all the computer science, computer labs were all Macs, and the accessibility just wasn't there. They didn't have voiceover. What was a predecessor to voiceover? I can't remember. But anyway, It wasn't something that was really going to be accessible for me. I took an arts degree, general arts degree in sociology and political science. But meanwhile, while I was studying this, I did have a Unix account and access to the Unix system, which I would access via PC. And I just taught myself how to use Unix because it just gave me so much more accessibility. Back then it was Telnet. You Telnet into the library, had an interface. I can go and I can search for all the books I needed for my essays, and I can reserve them, and then I can just go there and pick them up, and they'd have them all ready for me. And then I had a scanner with the Arkenstone software. Yeah, and I had that, and then I would scan all my books and all my materials. When I first started, it was tape-based stuff, but like my first year of university, all my textbooks were, and I guess guess everybody can relate to this. They're all one edition behind because they would only re-record it if it was more than 2 editions out or something. So I'd go write a test, and some of the times the questions would be totally different because they rearranged the chapter numbers. And so I always had to ask students, what's what? Because they'd say read chapters, 2, 4, and 8. They'd skip around, and they can you tell me what the titles of those are. And occasionally one of those chapters would just be totally missing.
Looking back at the amount of work that you kind of had to do just before you could even start doing your homework, like scanning, collecting, making it organized, and getting it ready, then you could start reading it or read it as you go, however you did it. And now you see people today with the handheld device such as the iPhone or the technology that they're utilizing today.
It's totally different now. I thought it was amazing when I got access to Unix and I could go online and search books and find them and read newspaper articles online and find some information like that. I thought that was just totally revolutionary because before that it was, like I said, it was books on tape. That's what I was using, and that was, really archaic. And now I see, not only can they access books they don't have to even go to a library. You can just download the books and read them. You just can't compare what's available now to what was available then. And even then, I thought what was available then was so much better than people before me, right? So it's always improving.
And that's kind of interesting because you got hooked up with Unix early on, which gave you access to a lot of stuff people were trying to get to, that didn't know anything about Unix. You kind of had a jump start.
Yeah, I did it out of my own self-interest that this gave me access to information I didn't have access to otherwise. I couldn't read a newspaper, and I can get newspaper articles, just day-to-day stuff, not just with school. I thought this was amazing. So, yeah, I took to it, and I learned it, and it was great. And then when I graduated, I had a general arts degree, which wasn't very helpful for me finding a job, but it was right in the 90s when the internet was, exploding, and people who knew Unix were high in demand. So I just naturally found myself doing that kind of work, doing some consulting work in the beginning, because it would be small companies that people who know somebody, and they say, yeah, we want to get into the internet. We don't know how do we get internet? Oh, well, I know how to do that. I can get you on the internet, no problem. I could set up a mail. You want an email? Oh, yeah, I'll set you up a mail server. And, fax servers were huge in the 90s. I did a lot of work setting up fax servers for small businesses and stuff like that. And now nobody uses faxes anymore, but that was a big thing then too. That's what really helped me, like going to university. I got a degree which I'll say was a useless degree, but it wasn't useless because if I hadn't gone to university, I wouldn't have learned Unix. I never would have learned that.
Can you explain Unix to the listeners?
So Unix is an operating system, similar but very different to, say, Windows or Mac OS, but more similar to Mac OS because Mac OS is a graphical interface built on top of Unix. So it's the underlying operating system, and it's primarily the operating system that runs the internet. So most internet servers are running some form of Unix. Most web servers are running on a form of Unix. Nowadays, Linux has pretty much dominated the market, and there's various different flavors of Linux, but it's all the same thing when it gets right down to it. It's just how it's packaged.
So the Microsoft operating system, Apple operating system are just interfaces that the general public uses to connect up
It's
with.
better for the desktop, right? It's a user productivity tool that helps people access softwares and prevent nicer menus and more usable interfaces. Whereas Unix, you're not concerned about the interface, you're more concerned about the performance. And it was just designed for a server architecture. Windows came from the desktop, and then they made a server version from that, but Unix is the other way around. It started out as a server operating system, and they made a desktop out of it.
What suggestions would you have for someone who is transitioning from high school to college to the workplace? What advice would you have for them?
For me, it was, like I said, I did a lot of consulting work. So if you have a skill and you have something that you can do, that was a good way to start. Like project-based to say, in my field it was easy because it was sort of a task, okay, we want to be on the internet, how do we do that? Okay, this is what you need, and set it up. But sometimes it's good just to, you have to just get your foot in the door, right? And then you have to prove yourself, and then once you have, then you can build upon that. So that's what I found. It's always hard starting because people will try to place barriers on you that you may not necessarily have. It's really important to be able to prove yourself one way or another, that even if it's a short-term position or maybe even volunteering, anything that you can sort of prove to people that, hey, I can do this.
Great. Trevor, we both have an interest in music, and it seems like it goes back to somewhat guitar-style music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And that was a common thing, plus the woodworking. And then you mentioned that you wanted to build guitar. What got your interest in manufacturing, building your own guitar?
I collect guitars, and what really got me started is you can buy guitars in China, which, I'll say are generally counterfeits. They will make them as a copy of an existing guitar. But for me, I wanted to basically have my own custom-made guitar. So I didn't want a Gibson or Fender logo on it. I wanted my own logo, and then I wanted it designed to my specifications. And it was kind of hit or miss. Well, I only bought 2 guitars. One was really great, and one was, I got a bit ambitious, and I tried to really spec it out to a lot of details, but there's a big communication problem between someone who doesn't speak English very well and someone who doesn't speak Chinese at all, right? So at that point I realized, well, why don't I just try to do this myself? Because the only way it's going to be the way I exactly want it is if I do it. And that's kind of always been my philosophy in life. Like, if you want something done right, just do it yourself, right?
And if you can't afford it, you better be able to make it yourself.
That too, exactly.
So what was your first start? How do you get started? First of all, you're talking woodworking. I used to teach woodworking to students, and it was like, that's an expectation that shocked them. Like, you're going to operate machinery.
Right. I had that same thought myself. Like, I didn't think blind people could use industrial machinery or even hand tools. I thought, this is very dangerous. I like my fingers. I need them every day. I don't want to lose them. So I thought my approach in the beginning was, I'm going to do this all with hand tools. I'm doing it as a hobby. This is not an occupation for me. I'm making guitars for myself, not for anybody else. I have time. I don't have a deadline. So I'm going to learn hand tools, and I'm going to build the guitars just using hand tools. Plus, I had limited space. I live in an apartment, and I work in my kitchen. I didn't want to make a huge mess. Hand tools are less messy than power tools.
Now, what you call an apartment is like a condo here. You own the space.
Sure. I got some little more
so
flexibility.
You can choose what you do.
Yeah, sure.
There you go.
But it's still an apartment style building, it's apartment style layout. So I started with the hand tools, and I used nothing but hand tools, and I made a guitar body. Not that I finished it, but I just wanted to get the experience. I just used cheap lumber. This is not going to be my masterpiece. This is going to be my learning test piece. So I joined 2 pine 2x8s. I bought one from Home Depot, and they cut it up for me, and then I sawed it by hand to the length I wanted. I glued the 2 pieces together to make it wide enough for a body. So I learned, okay, this is how you edge join. I had to make a plane. I had to make each side to be plane straight so you can join them together without a gap. So I, learned these basic techniques that everybody woodworking needs to know. Of course, you get machines to do that. I did it by hand, and then I used a special saw called a bow saw, which is not a bow saw you cut tree limbs, because if you do an Amazon search, that's what you'll get. But it's an old world tool before the bandsaw existed, is what they use these tools for. So it can cut around. It has handles on the side, and you can turn the blade to cut at any angle, any curve you want. And I can even cut 90 degrees with it. I had a guitar template. I bought the template. The shape of a guitar was like on a piece of plywood. That's 1/4 inch plywood. It gives you the 2-dimensional shape of the guitar. Made another template of that. Using that template, I used a bow saw to cut another one out. And then I placed the pine wood that I glued together in between. So there was a template on the front and a template on the back. I used a drill, and I drilled dowels to go through so I can line the back template up with the front template. Then I use that saw to cut the guitar body. And it's very rough because you can't go in a smooth motion when you can't see what you're doing. So I'd have to stop to make sure I didn't go too far out or I wasn't going too far in. So you get kind of a wavy pattern along the lines. And then I use these small little palm planes that are very fine and very small and can get into tight spots just to clean up the edges, and I got it all smooth. And I did the same on a guitar neck. I used a router plane, another hand tool to cut the truss rod channel, a spoke shave for carving the neck. And that's as far as I got before I came here. Last year was my first Woodworking for the Blind workshop, and that introduced me to tools. Again, I don't have the space for these big tools that are here, but one tool that is really helpful in guitar making is a router, a handheld router. I learned how to use that while I was here. I never would have bought it on my own because I wouldn't have known how to use it. So I learned it here, and that gave me the confidence to say, hey, yeah, this is easy. I can do this. So I've been working with that tool now to do a lot of the work, cutting the cavities, cutting the shape, and it's much more precise and saves a lot of time. And there's still a lot of room for the handwork and carving the neck using spoke shaves and planing to join wood. I use a combination of hand tools and power tools, and as I learn more power tools, I'll probably incorporate more of them into my work.
That's really cool. Like you've had drive, like whether it was to get more involved with Unix, getting access to books, and then when you want to learn something, you go to the resource, and you went to WW4B.org. And
I've always been self-taught. Like I taught myself Unix, and I taught myself woodworking with the hand tools, but there was a line. Like I wasn't going to teach myself on tools that could injure myself, that I wasn't confident in. That's what this workshop gives me, that confidence to learn stuff and say, hey, yeah, this is doable and this is easy. There's a limit that I'll go to. I won't endanger myself in my pursuit of knowledge and skills. Otherwise I like to learn stuff, and I like to learn stuff on my own. Part of the discovery of it, having people show you stuff is great, but to me it's the discovery, right?
The experience is the best teacher, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
We've been talking to Trevor Astrope from Montreal, Canada, and he's down here at the WW4B annual sessions. You're attending both of them. There's a beginners and an advanced.
Yeah, I was in the beginners last year, and I still am a beginner, but I've learned some skills that go a little bit beyond the beginner, and I'm not quite advanced yet, but I would become advanced, so I'm going to hang out with the advanced woodworkers to learn skills and tips and tricks from them so I can become an advanced woodworker.
Tap their brains.
Exactly.
And that's what it's all about, getting experience, learning from others, and getting a tool in your hand and doing something. So, Trevor, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Probably the easiest way is just send email, trevor@astrope, ASTROPE.ca.
So we hope you enjoyed this. We're going to tune out from the top of Veeder Mountain out here in Napa, California at the Enchanted Hills Camp. Thanks, Trevor.
Cool.
This concludes Jeff's conversation with Trevor Astrope. We'd like to thank Trevor for taking time out of his day at WW4B to chat with Jeff, and we wish him all the luck in the world with his guitar building efforts. And for all of you out there, thanks so much for listening, and have a great day. For more podcasts with the blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. And be sure to check out our free app in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store.